Support.
The maestro, please.
First pop analysis of fall, and we have a unique one for you today. Because today we will be looking at Bad Habit by Steve Lacy.
Steve Lacy.
Steve Thomas Lacy Moya is a singer-songwriter, record producer, and guitarist, first gaining attention when he performed with the R&B group The Internet. Since then, he has started his solo career back in 2017. Even including his discography with The Internet, this is his first pop hit.
Background.
Bad Habit was originally released on June 29th and charted in the middle of July at the very bottom, number 100. Since then, it has continued to rise, and thanks to its extensive use on TikTok, is number 2 as of the beginning of October. Bad Habit is off of Steve Lacy's second studio album, Gemini Rights, which was released on July 15th. Bad Habit is actually the second of 3 singles off this album, the first one being
Mercury running amok in my mind, can tell if I'm winning or falling behind.
and the third one being
Looking like it's all catching up to you lately. Been a couple.
Steve Lacy is actually the sole producer of this song, but joining him in writing, we have Winter Gordon, John Carroll Kirby, Fouché, and Matthew Castellanos. Diana Gordon, better known as her stage name Winter Gordon, supplied some of the background vocals on this track, and you can hear some of her other work in as well as
I'll give you electricity, give it to you. And even if I
John Carroll Kirby, not to be confused with bassist John Kirby, is a pianist most known for playing on the synthesizer. You can hear his work as early as
My mind's racing from chasing heartache.
but more recently in
Got a pack, came from the DHL. Just got up with a pack. Got out a pack, came from the DHL.
Next, we have Brittany Fouché, simply known as Fouché, an artist in her own right, and while her discography in terms of credits is not as decorated as the previous two, she does have a pop hit credit to her name, that being Finally, we have Matthew Castellanos, and this is his first pop songwriting credit, which is not unusual. While he's no stranger to the music industry, he is a filmmaker, therefore more known for music videos than actual music itself. Bad Habit is released solely by RCA.
Form.
Bad Habit is listed as an R&B, lo-fi, funk pop, and rock song. Sits just under 4 minutes long, is an A-flat major, and is 84 beats per minute. The song actually opens up with Fouché in the higher register before Steve Lacy himself finally joins in to start the song proper.
wanted me, I wish I knew
We then get the short first verse
what you do.
before moving into the first chorus
I bite my tongue, it's a bad habit.
and then getting a post-chorus.
I wish I knew. I wish I knew you wanted me.
We then get the slightly longer second verse the second chorus,
Now you're not too good for me, my dear. Funny you come back to me, my dear.
followed yet again by another post-chorus,
I wish I knew you wanted me. I wish I knew. I wish I knew you wanted me.
before going to a bridge,
You can't surprise a Gemini. I'm everywhere, I'm cross-eyed.
and then having what I would almost call an instrumental break, but you can hear Steve Lacy humming along underneath. Transitioning into a decent-sized outro,
Can't surprise a Gemini. But
before the song finally ends.
you'll miss me, don't beg you, babe.
Guitar.
Considering Steve Lacy is an accomplished guitarist, it should be no surprise that the guitar is one of the more prominent instruments in the song. It starts off going D-flat major 7, passing through A-flat major 7 into B-flat minor 7, and then going through C minor 7 back to the beginning of the progression, which it then repeats. The guitar part, though, does change once we get to the break. The rhythms are much more spaced out, at least for the beginning, and it goes F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, C minor 7, A flat major 7, D flat major 7, before finally ending on a just C7 chord. Right after that, it does change it ever so slightly in terms of how long the chords are held or the voicing of the chords, but it is still pretty much the same progression.
Bass.
The bass part, played by an actual bass guitar, is a bit more simplistic, simply going back and forth between D flat and B flat. That being said, it does have some passing tones that it uses, and a couple of little noodles, especially those high jumps in the second half of this phrase. The bass part doesn't really change much in the pre-break part of the song. It does change some of those passing figures up, though. The biggest change we get to the bass, though, is once we get to the break and for the rest of the song. You can see here the rhythms are much more complicated, and it's jumping around much more than it was previously.
Synth.
Finally, we have John Carroll Kirby's synth part, going up and down, as low as that A flat and as high as that E flat. You'll notice, though, as it gets lower in its range, it becomes a bit more difficult to hear, as opposed to the higher part in its range where it's very easy to hear.
Intro.
As stated before, the intro opens up with Fouché in that very high register before Steve Lacy joins in at the middle. That being said, Steve Lacy's range does actually span almost the entirety of the staff, that F at the bottom to that E flat at the top.
Wanted me, I wish I knew. I wish I knew you wanted me. I wish I knew. I wish I knew you wanted me.
Verse.
Moving on to the one-phrase verse, we actually see Steve a bit higher. The lowest note he actually hits is that A flat near the middle of the staff, going all the way to that top F, both falling off of it and doing a melisma on it down to E flat at the end of each bar.
What you do? Made a move, could've made a move. If I knew, I'd be with you. It's too late to pursue.
The second verse puts him even higher in his range, going up to that high C. For the rhythms, it's pretty much the same, a lot of eighth notes, given there's a much bigger emphasis on melismatic singing. In addition, we do have that repeat phrase down below underneath his main vocals, as well as these lovely upper supporting harmonies. Like I also said before, the second verse is a bit longer, still kind of repeating this same figure, but then has this very long held out no before we have an additional oh no up at the very top, starting off at that high B flat and slowly working its way down to that E flat.
I wish you wouldn't play with me. I wanna know.
Chorus.
Oddly enough, the chorus actually has him lower in his range than the verses. The highest note he ever hits is that B flat. Also note that despite it still being simplistic rhythms, we have a few more 16th notes here than we do in the verses.
I bite my tongue, it's a bad habit. Kinda mad that I didn't take a stab at it.
The second phrase of the chorus does put him a bit higher in his range, starts off hitting that C just a bit more often than, well, once, before going to that back half of the phrase, where again he's hitting that high F and doing these large leaps.
Thought you were too good for me, my dear. Never gave me time of day, my dear. It's It's okay, things happen for reasons that I think are sure, yeah.
The chorus, for the most part, does not change, minus some alterations for some changed words.
Can I bite your tongue like my bad habit? Would you mind if I tried to make a pass at it?
This trend continues into the last part of the second chorus, where it is pretty much just the same, again, minus some changes in words, but that final yeah is much longer and now much more melismatic.
Now you're not too good for me, my dear. Funny you come back to me, my dear. It's okay, things happen for reasons that I can't ignore, yeah.
Post-chorus.
You'll notice that the material in the post-chorus is the same material we initially heard in the intro, only difference being is we now have some ad-libs on the top of it.
I wish I knew. I wish I knew you wanted me. I wish I knew. I wish I knew you wanted me.
The post-chorus pretty much just repeats these same lines, I wish I knew you wanted me, with some variation in the ad-libs over top, and sometimes we even get some harmonies from the ad-libs.
I wish I knew. Yeah. I wish I knew you wanted me. I wish I knew you wanted me.
Bridge.
The bridge starts off extremely complicated as the actual instruments themselves begin to fade out. We have that main line in the middle, which is new material, and actually the most rhythmically complex stuff we've heard thus far. Below that, we have the stuff we've heard in the post-chorus and the intro, and above that we hear those harmonies we've heard before, but they're a bit more spaced out rhythmically, that root note hitting before the rest of the harmonies join an eighth note later.
Can't surprise Gemini. I'm everywhere, I'm cross-sighted. Now that you're back, I can decide if you're invited.
After that phrase, though, we just get the isolated main vocal line and literally nothing else, and very little effects applied to it as well.
You always knew the way to wow me. Fuck around, get tongue-tied. I turn it on, I make it rowdy. Then carry on, but I'm not hiding.
Once we get to the end of the bridge, the rhythms change and become a lot more simplistic, just doing syncopated eighth note rhythms with the occasional melisma now, and the guitar comes back in as an accompaniment.
You grabbing me hard, cause you know what you found is biscuits, is gravy, babe.
Break.
Again, I would call this an instrumental break, but if you listen carefully, you actually can hear Steve Lacy humming along to what he's playing, kind of improvising it, and the improv thus makes it the most complicated vocal line we have, both melodically and rhythmically. Again, you could argue whether these are vocals, because he's not actually singing and there aren't actually any words. Again, it's just humming, but again, it's in there, so I transcribed it.
Outro.
Finally getting to the outro, both melodically and lyrically, it is a combination of what we heard both at the beginning and the end of the bridge. The rhythms are slightly altered to begin with, and we have those lovely harmonies in the middle of the phrase.
Can't surprise a Gemini, but you know it's biscuits, it's gravy, babe.
You'll notice that the beginning of each phrase is slightly different, but he is always ending with that "it's biscuits, it's gravy" line.
I knew you'd come back around, cause you know it's biscuits, it's gravy, babe.
As we get to the back half of the outro and near the end of the song, his vocals become layered and we still have that lovely harmony in the middle. Note at the end, it's still that biscuits and gravy line, but the words are changed. Melody's the same though.
Let's fuck in the back of the mall, lose control, go stupid, go crazy, babe.
He repeats this idea one more time with the layered vocals, the harmony in the middle, and the biscuits gravy line with changed words to finally end the song entirely.
I know I'll be in your heart till the end. You miss me, don't beg you, babe.
This one was a fun fun one to do. It's not your traditional pop song. In fact, you could argue that it's not really a pop song at all and really only got up here thanks to its use on TikTok. But this actually points out something very interesting. This song and this album as a whole was jointly listed on both the R&B and rock charts. You'll remember that if you know the Record Rundown episode where we actually talked about the album as a whole. It really just goes to show you that you shouldn't assume things about certain songs just because they sound a certain way. Making those assumptions can quickly become a
bad habit. Kinda mad that I didn't take a step at it. Thought you were too good for me, my dear. Never gave me time of day, my dear.
I pointed out that John Carroll Kirby difference because when I was researching this, I absolutely for a second thought, wow, John Kirby, the 1930s jazz bassist, contributed to this song despite having died in the 50s? Boy, I guess Steve Lacy is a guitarist and he just really wanted to give credit to a great jazz bass player. No, there's somebody named John Carroll Kirby who makes much more sense to have contributed to this song than John Kirby, the 1930s jazz bassist.
It's okay, things happen for reasons that I think are sure, yeah.